this most sacred and holy of grounds in this wonderful United States of ours. What a perfect place to be. Perhaps the weather is not quite as perfect as I expected, but you are sure truly Westerners after my own heart if you don't let a little snow on you. This reminds me of back in 1913, I was asked to be the honorary president of the American History Association, filled with all sorts of historians and scholars. And that year, their annual meeting was in Boston in January. They had a snow, much like what we have out there tonight. And I said to the people who were running it, I said, why are you here in January in Boston with the snowstorm that we have? And they said, well, you realize most historians are not what you would say well-to-do. Most historians are what you would say cheap. And most historians know that the hotel rates in Boston are severely lower than in January. And I'm thinking perhaps the Grand Canyon Historical Society knows something about the hotel rates. Yes. You mean I told that wonderful story? I enjoy being about anywhere in these days. You know, not too many people are demanding that Theodore Roosevelt appear just instantly as a wonderful politician or a great storyteller. But what I've noticed is that in my trips around the United States, mainly speaking after dinner speeches, I've noticed that, well, a good many words are said. There's good food on the table. And most of the people that are in attendance are actually paying more attention to the food than they are to the speaker. And but I've also been told that the speaker may be good for one or two things, of which one is that if the speaker's good, it'll help the people sleep not only afterward, but during the speech. I will try to entertain you somewhat, but if you should nod off, that's fine, I understand. What I wanted to do is something different because I had heard about the quality of the audience here. And so instead of doing my typical speech, I said, I better write these things down or I'll go off on a tangent and be talking about how much fun it was to be a cowboy up in the Dakotas when I'm here to talk about the Grand Canyon. I know I've been invited to speak here on the greatest natural wonder of the planet, but I must say a few words about the men from Arizona and New Mexico who shared my crowded hour back in Cuba in 1898. How could I come west and do otherwise? I'm sure many of you have heard stories given out by the veterans of the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry, the Rough Riders. And I'm sure that you've kind of wondered how much of those stories are true and how much have been embellished a little bit. Knowing the men of my regiment as I did, they're all true, and they've all been embellished a little bit. Arizona men formed all of or parts of Troop A under Captain William Bucky O'Neill, Troop B under Captain James McClintock, and Troop C under Captain Joseph Alexander. There were nearly 240 Arizonans altogether. Now, New Mexico men made up all or parts of 4 troops. There was, let's see, I had it written, how could I forget him? Troop E under Captain Frederick Mueller, Troop F under Captain Maximilian Luna, Troop G under Captain William Llewellyn, and Troop A under Captain George Curry. There were about 300 New Mexicans. So a little over half the regiment was filled with men from these 2 territories. In addition to those men, on July 1st, when we went up San Juan Ridge, my major, the second in command, was an Arizonan you may have heard of, Major Alexander Brody of Prescott. Now, he wasn't the only good man from Prescott in the regiment. Chaplain Henry Brown, an outstanding chaplain, was also from Prescott and with us that day. Now, of the 7 troops, 2 troops, C and H, had the sad but important duty of staying behind with some of the equipment we couldn't bring and all of the horses. When we left Tampa aboard the Yucatan, only 2 men in the regiment had horses. Colonel Wood had 2, and I had 2, and that was it. Of the 400 plus men from the 2 territories that fought in Cuba, a little over 30 sacrificed their all, made the ultimate sacrifice for country and flag. Now, you need to know that these men of the Southwest were the very type of American fighting man that we wanted for the regiment. We had looked through and talked about who we wanted and where they would come from, Colonel Wood and I did. We wanted fighting men who knew how to take care of themselves and how to stand shoulder to shoulder with their comrades, who would not only be eager for battle, but they knew how to fight to take care of themselves and their fellow troopers. Now, it would be an injustice to Colonel Wood if I did not mention and I did not state that he was the very man to organize the regiment. I knew that I would be a pretty good colonel in the future, but to get off the ground, to get it started, we needed a man of Wood's organizational achievement and his discipline, and he was just the right man for the right time. You know, Wood had been stationed in Arizona in 1886. Indeed, he won the Medal of Honor for carrying dispatches through 100 miles of hostile territory. And in one instance, he led a contingent of troopers in hand-to-hand fighting against the Apache. The men of the regiment came from everywhere, from every part of the United States, from all types, Hispanics and Germans and Indians and Englishmen and Scotsmen, Southerners and Yankees, etc., etc. They were all quite mingled together. There were university men and men who had had hardly any schooling. There were yachtsmen and polo players serving right alongside cowpunchers and Indian scouts and store clerks. And they did it magnificently as brother to brother. A man's wealth or class standing meant nothing to the men of the regiment. What mattered was if a man could handle himself and he could do his job and be counted on when the time was needed to do that job. Men of wealth and class, like William Tiffany and Hamilton Fish of New York City, could be found washing dishes for their messmates without complaint. And these messmates included roustabouts and store clerks and cowpunchers, all sorts. The men were led by captains who were iron-fisted and iron-hearted, sort of, well, Captain O'Neill, Bucky O'Neill was typical, an upright fellow, the scourge of banditti in the Southwest, both Indian and white. There was a fellow named Tennessee, or we called him Tennessee. He didn't use his actual name. He said there was a small misunderstanding between himself and several lawmen in several different communities throughout the territory. But I tell you this, Tennessee, as with all the other, were a true blue patriotic American man who wanted to stand by the flag and fight under it. Of course, we knew we had to get good officers because they were leading extraordinary men, at least we felt so. And these officers were brave and courageous. They had to be. The captains led by example and fair discipline. I don't use this. Sorry. Now, in Minnesota, they gave me a megaphone. I will use a megaphone. My apologies, and I appreciate the offer, but I just can't operate that way. I have trouble working a telephone. Would you believe that? There's that thing on a stick in there, and you have to dial it and then ask for help. I can't do that either. I wasn't talking about telephone. I'm talking about the character rates.
Colonel,
traits.
I hate to interrupt you, but could we put batteries in so you don't have to use
You can do whatever you want, but we're going on with the speech.
I hope you would.
This Rough Rider, after I was president, and he was out on his own, had written me a letter in the White House. He wanted me to be a character witness for him at his trial here in Arizona. He said there was a mistake and it needed to be corrected. He was to go on trial for shooting and wounding his sister-in-law. He said, it was all a mistake, Mr. Roosevelt. I was aiming at my wife at the time. I would be glad to meet with any of my old comrades, if there are any in the audience. I was told that there was a Mr. Rink who had been at San Juan Hill, but I saw Mr. Rink earlier, and he did look ornery enough to be a Rough Rider, but he looked old enough to be from the Mexican War, so I don't think it's truly him. I forgot where I was going there. I truly treasure my visits with the boys that I had the privilege of leading. I recently heard that the regiment's mascot, a mongrel dog named Cuba, had died not long ago. Cuba had been brought back from Cuba to Arizona near Flagstaff by Corporal Jackson. Corporal Jackson apparently found a family that could take good care of him, the mongrel Cuba, not Corporal Jackson. And they adopted the dog. And finally, the little mongrel died and passed away and was given full military honors and a burial. Apparently, he's buried close to the Verde River that flows into the Salt River, that flows into Lake Roosevelt. So it seems quite appropriate that Cuba is still somewhat looking over us. I shall stop myself from these remembrances my time as the Colonel of the 1st United States Cavalry, or I shall speak of nothing else. I came here to share some thoughts about my time here in Arizona and the Grand Canyon. And rather than to cover the entire spectrum of what is known as the Great Loop Tour, I'm going to try to confine myself to those times that, well, I was actually here. And I think you'll understand why. I've always been aware of Arizona. I've always been aware of this natural treasure. Why, back in the 1880s, when I was a charter member of the Boone and Crockett Club, I fully supported the Democrat president, Grover Cleveland, in his creation of 13 national forests, adding about 21 million acres to our land at the time that was under federal protection. And that, of course, was in the Northwest. At the time, I had written and telling President Cleveland I hoped that he would have added more lands in Arizona and New Mexico to that protected list. At that time, the Painted Desert, Black Mesa Valley, Canyon de Chelly, as well as the Grand Canyon, were still quite vulnerable to settlers, developers, people with spatial interests. I wrote then that, taking and protecting the land from settlers and developers was indeed a serious matter, not to be taken lightly, but it needed to be done. For the conservation movement and future generations, it needed to be done, even though the great bulk of the people in this area at that time were against it. With the coming late winter of 1902, I was busy making plans for what was to be called the Great Loop Tour. It was the longest, most elaborate train travel, crossing trip, whatever you want to call it, ever undertaken by a president up to that time. I intended to use it as a way to present my conservation policies to all the regions of the West, and indeed to the nation as a whole. I wanted to do this before the 1904 presidential election. It got things too clamored up with politics. Things were slowly changing in the way of conservation, and I wanted to see that change to continue in regard to conservation and wise stewardship. I wanted the change to continue, and I wanted it to include men of wealth and power, of influence. For example, Frederick Weyerhaeuser, the timber magnate. He had built a tremendous industry, a business, through his own power and vision and understanding of the way that things worked, using his energy. But I was noticing at the time that he was having sort of a rethink about the way his business prospered. He was starting to think that, I just can't willy-nilly chop down all the trees that I want for my business and then have nothing but barren land. Perhaps I need to reseed. Maybe I need to protect certain species of trees. Maybe there's a wiser way to do that would allow my business to continue and to prosper. I could see this change of heart coming, and I wanted to encourage it. And I wanted to even make it come quicker, for I felt that if we could get Frederick Weyerhaeuser on our side, we could get others too. And so I wanted to use the trip to encourage his support for those things. I wanted to spend time with John Burroughs up in the Yellowstone Park. John's one of my favorite people. I also, in order to make things a little bit easier for those who supported me in my trip, I promised not to do any hunting in the Yellowstone at the time, because everybody thought that, yes, Roosevelt will grab his shotgun and go out and get a cougar or a bear or an elk or something. But I didn't. Well, I take that back. I got a field mouse. And I skinned it and preserved it and sent it to the Museum of Natural, or to the Smithsonian rather. But that's the only hunting, and I really didn't hunt it as my horse stepped on it one day. So it's not exactly trophy quality. But I had an idea of what I wanted this trip to do. I had 5 major speeches that I wanted to give. I was going to give a speech everywhere people would gather, but I had 5 major speeches that I wanted to give in Republican-friendly and Roosevelt-friendly country. The tour took me to many towns, including the cities of Chicago and Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Sioux Falls, Mitchell, Bismarck, and even to Little Medora, North Dakota, where once I had a couple of ranches. That was before we got to the Yellowstone National Park. I was at the park from April 8th to April 24th. It was glorious to be there at that time of year. There weren't very many people in the park, and I and John and a small contingent of Army cavalry went off to be by ourselves in the wilderness, in the natural world, to get away from, Washington, get away from the reporters that filled the train that followed us out west. I needn't have worried about the reporters going into the national park. You see, I told them that I was going to camp out every night while in the park, and that did not appeal to some of these New York reporters. Then I told them, and the alcohol was going to stay on the train while I was at the park. And all of a sudden, they all volunteered just to let me go, and they'd stay with the train and the alcohol. It was a wonderful time. After we left Yellowstone, I went back to St. Louis, where they were having the exposition celebrating Lewis and Clark's centennial. North Dakota had purchased my cabin on the Maltese Cross cabin, and they had taken it apart and rebuilt it at the exposition. And so they asked me to go there to open it up, and then I would go back later and help close it. Just as an aside, I got quite a reception. It was very good, very wonderful, very friendly, but it was nothing to the reception that Alice, my oldest daughter, got when she showed up. Alice is, let us say, quite a bohemian in her own right, and the press always loved to interview her for some reason or not other, because sooner or later she will say something that's worth a headline or two. Once when I was in the Oval Office in my second term, one of my aides came in and said, "Mr. Roosevelt, you have to do something about Alice." I said, "What's she done now?" He said, "Well, she's about to talk to some reporters, and we're afraid that, she might say something or do something." This was the Russo-Japanese war was going on, and her best friend was the Russian ambassador, Margarita Cassini's daughter, Margarita Cassini. "We're afraid she's going to say something to embarrass it or hurt you." And I told the fella, I can either be the President of the United States or I can be Alice's father. I cannot possibly do both. So you can understand why she was such a sensation when she was was there. Afterward, we headed back west. This trip, this Great Loop tour, was going to be for over 14,000 miles, 25 states and territories, 66 days, 260 stump speeches, and 5 major addresses. Being a Roosevelt and being a politician, I've always been ready to give a speech. I've seldom been silent at any one time. Once attending a Catholic service in New York City, which lasted nearly 3 hours, I told my host afterward that if I had to sit through a long sermon again, I'd much rather give it than listen to it. Now, I wanted to say a word about the Plains country that we traveled through heading toward the Grand Canyon. Everything about Kansas and Nebraska and Colorado appealed to me. The wide open spaces, the clean air, the well-maintained farms, the sturdy barns and silos, the wheat fields, the cornfields, the sunflower fields, an abundance of deer, and maybe even more important, a simple reader or spell book in every small school. And people gathered around the supper table at night saying God's grace. This is how I see the West. This is how I see America. For America is always the West. I eventually got to Denver, and then the train dropped down to Santa Fe, where at last I was able to see the prehistoric treasures that were kept there, and for the most part, little known by the rest of America. These treasures are so important that every bit of energy should be used for their preservation and care. The issue of statehood for New Mexico came up. I think they wanted to come into the Union before Arizona, but that's a political matter I'll let you folks argue out. The issue of statehood came up, and I told them there, as I told folks in Arizona, that if you wanted a chance for statehood during my administration, then New Mexico was going to have a huge forest reserve. This went over well with some, didn't go over well with others. I believe in an honest intercourse with the American people. By golly, you may not like what I gotta say, but I'm going to say what is in here and what's from up here, and it's going to be honest. I believe that, I can only do as good a job as I can if there's truth in what I say, and people believe it. Whether they agree with me or not doesn't matter. You need to believe that I am telling you the truth, at least as I see it. And I did so to the good folks of New Mexico. I found in Albuquerque the air was quite mild. The atmosphere was wonderful. And the general hospitality could not be exceeded anywhere. And then, of course, after I made a speech, we headed for the Grand Canyon. I arrived in Flagstaff in the pre-dawn hours of May 6th. I arrived here at the canyon about 9 a.m. I felt isolated here, and that's good. I was happy at finally being here. I'd heard so much and seen so many photographs and such. I gloried at being in the West. I gloried at being in Arizona. I gloried in being able to see the Grand Canyon for the first time. In one of my books, I called the Grand Canyon the most wonderful scenery in the world, and it is. I had long felt the Grand Canyon was the premier natural wonder in America. And on the morning of May 6th, my thinking was confirmed. If anything, I was somewhat disturbed because I knew that even while I stood there, there were people in the territory debating the future of the canyon and how it should be used. Not only the canyon, but the land around it. In my mind, there is no debate. There is no question of what to do. I couldn't even understand how they were even questioning it. I believe that wise stewardship of the Grand Canyon was beyond debate. I determined that the Grand Canyon must be the property of the people of the United States as a whole, and it must be preserved for generations to come. Not just this generation or next generation. Who are we to think that our generation is so vital and important that we're the only generation that counts? We need to be able to know that even if we're not here, generations of Americans will come and say thank you for what was done at this time here. I wanted to make it a national park early in my administration, but because of some local opposition, I recognized that Congress, with its own agenda, would refuse. With my second administration, I became determined that it would be protected by the federal government and as soon as possible. My attitude toward the Grand Canyon was uncompromising. I was not going to let corporate greed or citizen bumbling ruin this treasure. I would try the usual political channels. I would try to do it as a president is supposed to do it. If you listen to these pollywogs, they're in the Congress and they all the time telling you how to do something, and yet they don't do anything themselves. I would try to go through Congress and try and get it designated a national park. But if congressmen and those who pull their strings to get failed to do so, I was determined I was going to use an executive order to see to it that every last one of the 1,904 square miles was protected and saved for all generations of Americans. Public education toward the Grand Canyon was vital, but it all started with the public already here in Arizona. I needed Arizona to be on board. Fortunately, I had the heroes of San Juan Ridge on my side already, and they spread through the territory, spreading the word of, getting people to recognize what we were trying to do. And they willingly moved forward under their own colonel to start somewhat of a crusade here in Arizona to get the public on the preservation side. Tourism, even then, was an important part of the whole picture. I knew that local politicians had plans to operate a tourist railroad, I was told, close to the rim. I was led to believe they'd be so close people could just look out their windows of the train over the edge of the canyon. Considering some of the terrible railroad accidents back east that happened too frequently, I was glad to hear that Santa Fe finally put their tracks down where they are here now, a safe distance. I was aware of miners filing claims, of ranchers grazing cattle all along the rim, believing they had the right to do so, the right to exploit the land as they saw fit for their own profit. I decided that I should address the public of the territory directly while I was at the canyon that first day. I'm pretty good with a quote, with a phrase, quite quotable as a fact. Speak softly and carry a big stick has done me a lot of good over the years. That day at the canyon, I believe I gave one of my more shorter and more memorable speeches. I told those assembled, I want to ask one thing of you. In your own interest, in the interest of the country, keep this great wonder of nature as it now is. I hope you won't have any building of any kind to mar the grandeur and sublimity of the canyon. You cannot improve upon it. The ages have been to work on it, and man can only mar it. Keep it for your children and your children's children and all those who come after you as one of the great sights for Americans to see. Most of the leading politicians of the territory were gathered in the crowd here that day, I am told. I hope they were listening. If they weren't listening, maybe they could see the rapture on my face at just being here, at standing at this spot. I hope that the earnestness in my voice fell upon their ears. There was a sense of eons of years here, and one could easily consider one's immortality here. Pardon me, I cannot see a thing without my spectacles, and my pince-nez are sliding a little bit. Here we are. The treasure that we have here as Americans is grander than any music that I ever heard. It is finer than any poetry I ever read. Time itself is on display here. Surely the citizens gathered around could see the strength and vitality of the Grand Canyon as it inspired me to do all I could to save it from, destruction or exploitation. Perhaps if my administration had done nothing else in 7.5 years than fight on behalf of the Grand Canyon, then that would have been a legacy for my administration for all time. Later that day, while entertaining reporters on South Rim, I said that this place is one of the great sights that every American should see. Indeed, before my train pulled out for Barstow, I vowed to return to the Grand Canyon with my sons, which of course I did in 1913, and anyone who knew me could see that it was clear that once again, the beauty of the real West had entranced me and captured me. And from that point on, in my trip, all of my speeches on that trip were a promotion of the holy trinity of irrigation, forestry, and preservation. And while it took longer than I expected, by 1908, I finally had the tool to use to act with on behalf of those who sought to save the canyon. The American Antiquities Act of 1906. Pardon me. I digress for just a moment because I love the American Antiquities Act. As I said, I couldn't get the Congress to declare the Grand Canyon a national park, and only Congress can do that. Congressman from Iowa, John Lacey, and if you don't mind my saying so, I think every national forest, not every national forest, and every national park and memorial should have a statue of John Lacey in front of it. He came up with an idea of how to, as they say on the streets of Brooklyn, snooker the Congress. And he wrote a bill that was so well written that even the most, I'm trying to find a kind word to say in a mixed audience, even the most hardened of congressmen couldn't deny this bill's passage. In May of 1906, they signed a bill, the Act for American Antiquities. It was a wonderful bill. Basically, it said that if there is federal property that the President of the United States deems of historic, geological, social, environmental value, that he could automatically declare it an American Antiquities, a monument, and set aside the minimum amount of land needed to protect it, to care for it, to show it in its best manner. This is a most wonderful act. All of a sudden, President Theodore Roosevelt and presidents after Theodore Roosevelt didn't have to wait on a tortoise-paced Congress. We didn't have to convince people in Congress who are often as not looking first as what's good for them, then what's good for those who pull their strings, as I said, and then maybe what's good for the American people. If you may get the idea that I don't think much of the American Congress, and that would be a good idea for you to get. I often have said that at roll call in the Senate each morning, the senators don't know whether to say present or not guilty. There are a couple of excellent senators, Beveridge of Indiana and Lodge of Massachusetts. After that, it gets mighty slim. But nevertheless, they passed the American Antiquities Act. I didn't have to worry about developers. I didn't have to ask this robber baron, if I can use the term, and it's probably not correctly used here, if he minded if I did this. I could just sign it. And on January 11th, 1908, under the American Antiquities Act, I declared 806,000 acres of the Grand Canyon as a national monument. It was wonderful because in the act itself, it said the amount of land that I, as president, could declare a monument is the minimum amount needed to, like I said, protect, care, wisely use. The great thing about that is most congressmen, their idea of minimum is not near as big as Theodore Roosevelt's idea of minimum. So 806,000 acres was the minimum that we needed to set this aside. I was determined, well, my goal was straightforward. I was going to save the canyon. That was it. That's how simple it was. I was going to do whatever I could to save the canyon. There were other men before me who tried. But, I had the bully pulpit, and I intended to use it. If Congress and Arizona attorneys were confused about the canyon's value, I was going to clear it up for them. If Congress was asleep and slow, I was determined to wake them up. This is a holy spot for all times, for all generations, and we're not going to waste time haggling over what's best for a small group of people when we can do this for the entire United States. What my administration was able to do was carry on the work of 19th century explorers and legends like John Hance and Robert Stanton and William Bass. By the way, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Hance while I was here back in 1903. He's quite a storyteller. And I intend to invite him to the White House if I ever get back there again. I think he'd make an excellent dinner guest. Those men that I just mentioned saw the worth of the Grand Canyon and the attraction of the canyon for tourists. And, well, it wasn't so much that I did this or I did that. What I did do is take the ideas and the enthusiasm and the energy from those people like you, and shove it to the forefront of our national consciousness. I do have a pulpit that people will listen to where others may not have. I was determined that someday this is going to be a national park. But until then, I wanted to put a stop to any development or any way that someone could, in the future, put a timber across the tracks. On my way to Arizona in the canyon in 2003, folks would say, if you really want to see the canyon, go see Captain Hance. Well, that first trip was a quick one-day visit. I had been invited back to the territory in March of 1911, after I was president, for the dedication of the huge reclamation project northeast of Phoenix. It was later named for me, which I very much appreciate. While in the territory, I decided to journey up here to the canyon. Captain Hance certainly got wind of my arrival and was quick to invite me on a mule ride before or down the rim. Down below the rim. Curious as to his Civil War days and the title captain, I asked him about this, but for some reason he diverted my attention and did not really want to talk about that, and he led me and a dozen other riders to descend the trail. Now, I've traveled on many trails, but none with so many switchbacks and drop-offs as the Bright Angel Trail. My mule must have thought that I was a greenhorn and that it was his duty, if possible, to scare the daylights out of this rube from back east. But I'm a Roosevelt, and I don't scare easy. I found it most enjoyable, and wherever the mule looked over the edge, by golly, I can look over the edge too. But I can see now why the Democrat Party uses the mules as a symbol. But just and this is nothing against the mules, by the way. I delighted in the stories that Captain Hance shared with me. I delight in all stories of all the veterans from our Civil War, even those who wore the gray. For I had members of my own family who wore the gray during our great Civil War. After that adventure with Mr. Hance, I, of course, did come back, and I brought two of my sons with me. I brought the two youngest, Archie and Quentin. Ted and Kermit were grown men out of school and advanced quite a ways on their own careers by then and could not come. I had scheduled a South American speaking tour to be followed by an adventure down the Brazilian rivers, a river yet unknown, uncharted. And that was going to be in the spring of 1914. So the summer of 1913 provided the only free time for me to come back west. On July 12, 1913, Archie, Quentin, myself, and cousin Nicholas Roosevelt registered at the El Tovar Hotel at the Grand Canyon. We descended into the canyon on the morning of July 15th to start a 350-mile journey. We crested the Buckskin Mountains on the 17th and spent about a 2-week period in the Kaibad National Forest hunting cougar and sleeping out under the stars. By this time, while I enjoy hunting, I don't hunt like I used to. I just as soon hunt with a camera as with a gun, but I do enjoy hunting. I did not bag anything but one cougar on this trip, and I only did that because Archie wanted to see what his father's hunting skills actually were. I spent most of the time washing dishes and washing clothes and just enjoying the great outdoors. I guess that's what we older gentlemen do at some point in our lives. I let most of the boys do the shooting, and in truth, that was fine with me. On August 1st, we reached, by trekking through the Pariah Plateau. The plateau is a most wasteful and desolate place, as you already know. We re-equipped at Lee's Ferry and then headed for Tuba City. After a couple of days in that area, we swung north towards Kayenta and spent about 2 days just getting to that part of the reservations. Now, I'm sure that you're aware that Kayenta is the home, or close to the home, of John Wetherill's trading post, and is south, and the post is somewhat south of the Rainbow Bridge, which was our ultimate destination. We used Wetherill's place as a jumping-off spot, and then it took us 3 days of most delightful and wonderful and hard journeying to get there. After camping out a few more days and observing a Hopi Indian snake ceremony, we headed back east by August 26th. I was back in Oyster Bay right then, or just after then, planning my trip to South America and taking on political battles for the Bull Moose members of the Progressive Party. I'd be happy to lead the nation again as president. I'd be happy again to sit in the office. I find that the man who currently sits in the White House is a very good politician, but I am of the opinion that he is less than presidential and does not have the manly qualities or even a backbone. I think he has abandoned national honor and common moral ethics. He's accepted the old politics and the old ways so that we are not necessarily looking to the future by accepting our role as world leader. We are going backwards. Now, don't go writing that in the papers. I'm in enough hot water with Mr. Wilson and his gang as it is. He reads that, and I never will get into the fight in Europe. Of course, the American people will have to feel heroic to ever get this old mustache in Washington, D.C. again. But it may happen. The Panama Canal is up and going and is doing very well. And new battleships like the USS Arizona, under construction as we meet today, that steams through the isthmus, and of the USS New Mexico, which is on the planning board as we speak today, as it passes through the isthmus. Maybe those great battleships just may keep the name Roosevelt alive for a while longer. And who knows, but the legacy of the national forest, historic sites, national monuments, and parks might be something that the American people appreciate and take great pride in, that they just might think that the name Theodore Roosevelt is worth remembering for a few more years. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.
If they ask me.
Now I am. I turned it off. The Colonel is available for any questions or comments. He's going to stay a while. In fact, if you want a photo op with him, he'd probably do that too. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Colonel, sir, I would like like to know if when your Rough Riders found out that they had to fight on foot instead of on horseback, did they complain to you, and how did they do?
Let me see. You're from Arizona, and you asked me if those men would complain? Well, of course they complained. But what was harder was the tears in the eyes of the 4 troops of men who couldn't go. They cried. And we're talking about hard-bitten Westerners. They wanted to be in on the fight and the action. And they would have gone barefoot if that would have gotten them to Cuba. So they had that spirit and spunk. And when we went up San Juan Ridge, there was one horse on the field, Little Texas. And there was one man aboard Little Texas, and that was me. Everybody else was running, following the points of the Old Glory up the hill. And they were fighting Indian style. You know, one man firing and kneeling and loading, another man running, buying. And the Spanish were good shots. The Rough Riders went down every foot of the way. When we got up to the hill, we had a fight around a blockhouse and a kettle. And we were standing around congratulating ourselves when we started to take bullets from a ridgeline across the way. You see, we had run up and captured the wrong hill. We hadn't captured San Juan Hill. We'd captured Kettle Hill. The San Juan was over there. Well, too many good men had fallen going up that hill, so I wasn't going back. And if any of you know me, one of my key phrases is, get action. So, charge. We ran down the other side of Kettle Hill and ran up San Juan Ridge and kicked the Spanish off. And there before us was the city of Santiago and the grand prize, the Spanish fleet in the harbor. So, yes, they were grand. So I had to send Little Texas back. You know, the only horse on the field, and it couldn't go all the way up Kettle Hill with me. I had to turn around and send it back. Not a scratch, not a wound on Little Texas. I don't know. Maybe the Spanish just didn't want to shoot a good horse or something. I'm not sure of that. But any other questions? Yes, in the back.
How was working with Congressman Ralph Cameron?
How was working with?
Congressman Ralph Cameron of writing the trail.
Well, you know, your grandmother told you if you can't say a good word about someone. And I really don't have a problem with that particular individual. I don't have a lot of information as to a background, so I can't tell you just which way he would lean at which time. Generally, I like people to act and think like I want them to act and think. So it's like with the reporters. I invited all the reporters to come into the White House when I was there, and we would hold a press conference. We would talk, but actually I would talk. They would listen. And as long as they reported it fairly, we had no problem. But if I felt that they were taking undue advantage, they were put in what's called the Ananias Club and never heard from again. They would be just over there. Congressman Cameron did not have, as far as I know, a strong position in Congress. If he did, I don't ever remember hearing of it. I think the best man that the territory could have sent to Washington, both before and after, was Alexander Brody. But there were many good men. Unfortunately, Bucky O'Neill never made it off the island. He was killed by a sniper or sharpshooter at the foot of the hill. So, any other questions?
Who were some of your dinner guests?
Oh my goodness, Pablo Casals, Owen Wister, Jules Jugeron, the French ambassador, my favorite ambassador. There were some really good ambassadors. Speck von Sternberg, the German ambassador, was a very good dinner guest. Well, the English ambassador wasn't too good. Ambassador Mortimer, He had all the brain power of 5 guinea pigs on a wheel. He was just... But Jules Juzeran was a super... I used to hate to sit behind the desk of the president in the Oval Office. I just hated it. I needed to get out. I needed to hike. I needed to go somewhere. There was a lady here tonight that I think you're sitting somewhere over there, hiked up to the rim today. I admire somebody with that energy and devotion to a natural way. Well, you know, a president can't just go or leave unless he's Theodore Roosevelt. So what I did was I would get tired of being behind the desk. I would push it back, and then I would go for a walk in Rock Creek Park. And it was a Roosevelt walk. If you wanted to talk to the president, I'd be glad to talk to you. But you had to go on the walk with me. And wherever I went, you had better go. If you couldn't keep up, don't even bother starting. And we had one rule. If you come to an obstacle, you could go over it. You could go under it. We would prefer if you went through it, but you could not go around it. And generally, that was quite all right. A few scratches, a few bits of torn clothes. Well, this time, Jules Juzeran had come to the White House to present his credentials and to speak to the president. And he was told, you can see Mr. Roosevelt, but he's going out for his walk in Rock Creek. If you want to talk to him, you have to join the group. And there were about 15 or 16 of us, all gentlemen, all men. And there was a good reason for that. Sometimes the walk did get a little rough. We would often come to a part of Rock Creek where we would roll our pants up and take our socks and shoes off and carry them on our head across the creek. Or if it was deep enough, we would take our pants off and pile them up and go. So you can see we're not about to do anything inappropriate with ladies around. And Jules Juzeran went along. We came to a part of Rock Creek I'd never crossed before. And it just so happened that it was about this deep, at the deepest part. So being explorers of the first rank, we'd do what probably any of you gentlemen would do. We took all our clothes off. But, excuse me, ladies, I do not mean to embarrass you with that, but the truth is that there were 15 men, naked as the day they were born, carrying their clothes on their head, going across Rock Creek. As I got to the other side of the Rock Creek, I looked back, and the other members were coming out of the creek and trying to dry themselves off and put their clothes on. And I noticed that the French ambassador, Jules Juzeran, was coming across the creek, also in nature's zone. And he's holding his clothes above his head, but he had his gloves on, his kid gloves. I said, Ambassador Juzeran, why are you wearing the gloves? And he said, it's in case we meet the ladies. There's always something fun and interesting going on. I enjoyed every minute of being president. I look forward for every waking moment. I enjoyed every fight, every scuffle that we would take. It was all a most wonderful time. And I do not mean to hold you, but one more question, and then I'll be glad to talk to you afterward.
Yes, Colonel Roosevelt, you are so enthusiastic about this place called Grand Canyon to become a national park. If you could come back here in 100 years or so, let's say in 2019, how popular do you think this park might be if it occurs? How many people do you think might be here? Would it be of any interest to anybody?
Well, part of that depends upon how many people or how many trains the railroad companies can get in here on a set day. More trains mean more train yards, more tracks. What are you willing to balance out this beautiful scene with those things that are necessary to get people here with modern transportation? I would say if they got a couple 100,000 people a year, it would make everything worthwhile. But the problem is we have a Congress that is noticeably, historically, slow in moving, and noticeably and historically able to put the wrong value on the wrong item of a bill, of something that need to be done. I'm more worried that if we don't get this under a national park, what shenanigans can be done. What people can go in and pull this out and put that in and take it, instead of just leaving it alone for people to enjoy as best that can be done. For I understand tourists mean people coming in, and people generally mean some sort of obligation to repair, to clean up, all those things. You know, when I was a young man, our nation had become a trash heap. That's one of the things that got me involved in conservation and preservation and natural resources. The generations before me were great generations, proud and true Americans, but they just threw things away without considering what they were doing. They just used up things without considering what they were doing. So that's what my concern. 100 years from now, will our Congress, if this is a national park, will our Congress do what is necessary each and every year to make sure that this functions on an appropriate level where it is preserved and cared for? I would be glad to come back. So, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Brown, do you have anything you wish to add here? You're speechless? I can't believe that. He's just... Hey, you haven't been speechless since I got here 3 days ago.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just speechless. This has been a terrific presentation, Colonel.
Well, thank you, sir.
I have no questions. I think everybody's really happy that you visit us. I know you need to get back on that train and continue west, but thank you very much for stopping.
And I'd be glad to visit with anybody. I have something for you, young man. If you sat through a politician's speech, I have something for you. So if there's any other children out here, I've got something for them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.